Which building is it, sir?
That's all 1 at 1 o'clock.
Hey, which building? The one at 1 o'clock. Hey, Dave, which one is it? Is it the one on the left or the right?
The one on the left.
Hey, isn't this danger close for the task force?
Come on, since when does Shepard care about danger close?
What I'm talking about. Get some, baby! Battalion is Oscar Mike!
Oscar Mike! The building's going down!
Woo! The network's gonna pay big for this one. Keep dreaming, Spielberg. No, man, seriously, that was extreme.
Soon after completing my replay of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, I was eager to dig into its sequel, which was released on November 10th, 2009, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. This is partly due to the wealth of text within Call of Duty 4 that I dug into in my previous essay, and also because of my foreknowledge of the sequel and what imagery is contained within it. The villains, Makarov and General Shepard, the infamous No Russian level, its portrayal of a Russian invasion of Washington, D.C. and its surrounding suburbs, its adaptation of concurrent events, and its full transition from a game paying lip service to the sacrifice and hardships of soldiers into Michael Bay-esque action movie fiction. In this essay, I will be looking at how those topics read today, alongside insight gained from interviews and critiques that were published at the time of release, as well as long after. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 was revealed with a teaser trailer during GDC in San Francisco, California on March 25, 2009, with an offhand demo shown during E3 that same year, featuring the level Cliffhanger, notable for its scripted intro of climbing ice-covered walls and the new heartbeat sensor weapon attachment, as well as the ending in which the player shoots with one hand and steers a snowmobile with the other, escaping pursuing Russians and jumping across a massive canyon to the extraction helicopter. We were told that Makarov is the new antagonist, replacing Zakhaev as an even more extreme Russian nationalist whose strategy is more covert than Zakhaev's open revolution. In late October, the mission No Russian was leaked online via a gameplay video. In this mission, the player participates in a mass shooting at an airport, which caused quite a stir with the gaming community before and after the game's release in the following month. Activision confirmed the leak was authentic to VG 24/7 shortly after it was taken down, stating, "Yes, it is. The scene establishes the depth of evil and the cold-bloodedness of a rogue Russian villain and his unit. By establishing that evil, it adds to the urgency of the player's mission to stop them." The content, motivations, and effectiveness of that scene have been greatly discussed and will be covered later in full. Despite some pre-release worries thanks to No Russian, Modern Warfare 2 was a massive success, earning critical praise at a majority of outlets and selling 4.7 million copies within the first 24 hours in North America and the United Kingdom. Though it may be overshadowed by its predecessor for standardizing the Modern Warfare setting within video games, the legacy of Modern Warfare 2 remains one of nostalgia for time spent in its multiplayer lobbies and discussions of the ludicrous story beats and explosive set pieces. Modern Warfare 2 was also the final game created by Infinity Ward before the great exodus that occurred as a result of a dispute between Activision and Infinity Ward heads Vince Zampella and Jason West in March of 2010, 4 months after the game was released to the public. More than half of the studio either departed or were fired in the ensuing months, most of which would go on to form Respawn Entertainment and Electronic Arts and create the Titanfall franchise. Something that is lacking in pre-release coverage for Modern Warfare 2 compared to the first game is thematic questions pertaining to the setting. This is likely due to the success of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. The sequel is a known quantity in terms of what it will be, how it will play. Infinity Ward proved they were capable of adapting Modern Warfare without sinking the financial cash cow the franchise was becoming. Now, the specific interrogatives people had was more about how it would succeed on the tail of the first game. Will Price and Soap return? Who is the villain this time? Where will we be going? How are they going to top the nuke level? There are some observations made prior to release that I found interesting. For a demo of the level Takedown, it was mentioned that your commanding officer also mentions that there are civilians present, obviously setting up some difficult street combat commonly found in recent US battles, i.e. Fallujah, Iraq, and after the group scatters, the real firefight begins. This seems to address a complaint leveled at the previous game by some critics, that the game's lacking of a civilian presence greatly worked against its attempt to portray war with a sense of realism. While civilians are present in Modern Warfare 2, theirs is always very brief. No Russian is likely the most infamous level involving civilians due to the nature of the mission encouraging the player to open fire on them as part of a deep cover mission. The beginning of Takedown, however, has you running amongst civilians while chasing down your target until you enter an alleyway and are given a shot to take. Afterwards, you enter a favela, and a friendly shoots into the air to scatter what little civilians there were, and the rest of the level is populated by enemies to freely shoot without worry. Late into the campaign, hostages need to be saved on an oil rig, though they mainly appear as targets not to shoot among targets to shoot during slow-motion breaching sequences. During the level Wolverines and Exodus, which both take place in the suburbs of the United States, you fight your way through houses, apartment complexes, strip mall parking lots, and mansions with nary a non-combatant in sight. The sole exception is Raptor, a VIP in Wolverines who is carried from Nate's restaurant to the meat locker in Burger Town, then to the convoy, and never seen again. However, if you are performing your duties as yelled to you by the game during this brief section, you'll likely never see him, as I failed to. The strip mall Burger Town sits in is a representation of middle-class America, much like the artificial houses you were shooting through just before. With all the people gone, though, it renders the objects as the things you are fighting for, and not the people they're likely meant to represent, as wonderfully put by Michelle Arhart for Bullet Points Monthly. What was likely meant to be a quick stop in a refreshingly unusual setting for a military shooter instead became a thematically loaded siege scenario, with me treating a fast food restaurant, a bastion of American capitalism, as more worthy of defense than the White House. In the lead-up to the 2019 reboot of Modern Warfare, it may have looked towards the first game for most of its ethos, but it was apparent that it would still be pulling from certain aspects of the sequel as well for its plot and mechanics. A London terrorist attack is the inciting event for the conflict in-game, pulling from No Russian of Modern Warfare 2 and Davis Family Vacation of Modern Warfare 3, and the nuclear weapon killstreak reward returns for Modern Warfare 2. This latter fact is even used to excuse away the inclusion of a white phosphorus killstreak reward in the multiplayer, because multiplayer is like the distant weapon fire you hear a few blocks away from where the single player is. And Jeff Smith also pointed out that previous Call of Duty games had the game-ending nukes, but didn't quite generate the same reaction White Phosphorus is getting now. Smith isn't wrong to assert that maybe more of a reaction should have been made to the playification of nuclear weapons in the franchise. In Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, a nuclear weapon was utilized to assert how evil the villain you were hunting down was, as well as victimizing the United States military by having you live out the final moments of Sergeant Paul Jackson before he succumbed to his wounds. Modern Warfare 2 further detaches nuclear weapons from the reality of their usage by allowing players to achieve a 25 kill streak, the highest kill streak requirement, to set off a tactical nuke that ends the game in victory for the player's team regardless of current score. Prior to release, IGN even ran a top 10 nuclear explosions in games listicle that shows how detached we are from their substantial threat in reality. Partially this is due to the time and cultural mood of 2009, but it's also because things like bombing Japan in World War II is just a footnote in high school history class, and the omnipresent threat of nuclear warfare isn't quite as palpable as it was during the Cold War. The potential of nuclear extermination wasn't something that really came up, except when it appeared in the news as something Iran, one of the bad guys, was trying to achieve. Even then, all that was happening was across the ocean in a landscape we thought of as multiplayer maps in Call of Duty and Battlefield. Blowing up stuff in games is a lot of fun, and nothing blows up quite like a good old nuclear detonation. Blowing up a nuke is not only an awe-inspiring moment, but it's also a bit cathartic. Have you been having problems with a certain opponent? Well, nothing puts him in his place than a nuke up his nose. Asserting that one mode of play within a game is regarded as a playground of no consequences, while also asserting of the other that there aren't sharp lines, everything is life and death and there are consequences, as well as we're trying to merge the authenticity of the actual battlefield and give the player something that they can actually invest in, doesn't magically absolve you of taking very real and very deadly weapons and rendering them as thoughtless playthings for someone to lay down via a tap of an iPad. Both of these presentations of war occur within the same game, and running from acknowledgement of that dissonance shows that Infinity Ward is not interested in reconciling that Modern Warfare 2019 is actually two very different games put under the same executable. The reboot's marketing subtly acknowledges tonal whiplash within the games, as the trailers will either highlight the single-player campaign or the multiplayer, but never both at the same time. Condensing the essence of each part of the game into a 2-minute sequence would lay bare the massive gulf between them. Nonetheless, even when fully separated from each other, it's not as if the campaigns would suddenly become an excellent representation of war by themselves, as we will see as we make our way through Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Using a nuclear weapon is desired, rewarded, and satisfying to achieve and execute in Modern Warfare 2, and just because it exists only within the multiplayer doesn't negate the meaning of that statement. With the reboot, taking something as horrendous as white phosphorus and turning it into a toy is disgusting when you spend any time looking at images of the victims of the weapon, and the same perspective should be rendered at nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons were used against civilians, killing over 100,000, wounding tens of thousands more, and the aftereffects of the irradiation has taken uncounted lives long after the bombs were dropped. White phosphorus is used in areas populated by people who are simply attempting to continue to live amidst conflict and lingers ready to burn again long after the initial deployment. Drone strikes routinely kill people attending weddings. When the developers talk about authenticity, they're talking about very specific things. The look and sound of the guns and explosions, scripted animations of Breach and clearing a door, rendering the hair in Price's mustache. That this authenticity stops short of things such as collateral damage, the reality of what warfare actually is like for a soldier, and what a bullet actually does to somebody's body is more than irresponsible. They want to be authentic to war, but only in ways that can sell, not challenge. In film and art form, games desperately want to be regarded like. To be anti-war is a great challenge. Francis Ford Coppola, talking about Apocalypse Now, a reference point for uncounted number of game developers, said that he didn't consider his film to be anti-war. No one wants to make a pro-war film. Everyone wants to make an anti-war film, he says. But an anti-war film, I always thought, should be like Kon Ichikawa's 1956 post-Second World War drama, The Bermuse Heart, something filled with love and peace and tranquility and happiness. It shouldn't have sequences of violence that inspire a lust for violence. Apocalypse Now has stirring scenes of helicopters attacking innocent people. That's not anti-war. When it comes to video games, while they will never audibly say that they want to make a pro-war film, they certainly want to make the violence within them marketable, to feel good, to be something the player wants to actively engage in. Not that they'll ever be able to accomplish this fully. After all, much like a steering wheel and a gas pedal for Forza Motorsport is infinitely far away from replicating the kinetic motion and weight of an actual moving vehicle, your controller will always be fathoms away from replicating the feeling of firing an assault rifle, no matter the advances in haptic and audio feedback. It's all smoke and mirrors. Gestures at something real in both gameplay and narrative. The developers can continue to talk out of their ass about telling stories, but I'm done giving them leniency for being a video game that still has to be fun, and this series especially deserves nothing but contempt in terms of their PR statements about how they are adapting current conflicts for their next $60 product. If you want to be as well regarded as the Hurt Locker, you should start by having a text whose quality is better than Olympus Has Fallen. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 signals the end of attempting to present the franchise as a send-up to the heroes of past and present wars. Instead, it indulges in whatever movie the developers happen to be fans of, going as far as explicitly lifting imagery from Michael Bay's The Rock with a shootout within a prison's shower room and lighting flares to ward off an impending airstrike. Instead of Alcatraz, they swapped the former situation with a Russian gulag, and the latter for the White House. Players will dodge rocket fire on snowmobiles, every extraction vehicle is on bingo fuel as you make your last-second escape, you dual-wield 2 submachine guns, sentry guns auto-target enemies, sensors detect the heartbeats of enemies and differentiate between them and allies, and one of the major new mechanics is slow-motion breaching segments, in which the player places explosives on a door or wall and proceeds to slowly take out every enemy inside. These sequences all simply scream at the player, how badass. Strangely, some comedic death animations from the multiplayer made their way into single-player as well, such as an enemy suddenly standing straight and falling backwards upon death. The soldiers you fight alongside in the Task 141 levels of the game no longer have believable codenames like the SAS in Call of Duty 4. Now they are just one-word descriptors that read like gamer tags on Xbox Live. Meat, Worm, Archer, Toad, all killed off and you'll never know their actual names. That acknowledgement is reserved for the ones who get the most voice lines, Soap and Price. Prominently featured is also Ghost, a reincarnation of Gaz from the previous game, whose VO returns only to be killed again at the climactic twist. Transitioning into an action movie isn't limited to just the micro elements of gameplay, mechanics, and imagery, but the macro level of the overarching story they are telling. Whereas Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare adapted conflicts of Iraq and Afghanistan, and despite segments of Bond villainy was still able to gesture towards contemporary events enough to keep it grounded, Modern Warfare 2 enters the realm of pure speculative fiction, with a Russian invasion of the United States and a single man who was able to manipulate an entire country from the shadows. This set the stage for every Call of Duty afterwards. After Treyarch's Black Ops, which took great liberties at interweaving your characters throughout the conflict of the 1960s, every Call of Duty is a future warfare speculative fiction story, save for the aptly named World War II and this year's Call of Duty Vanguard. Entries taking place during World War II were required to have enough authenticity to passively respect the people who died in that war. This change actually worked in the series' favor. Dropping the charade of authenticity gave way to a feeling of, let's have fun and make an action movie, which is ultimately more honest to the medium than 2019's very serious and very gritty reboot. The explicit lifting of pulp action movies in Modern Warfare 2 doesn't read like an out-of-place reference to aliens like in its predecessor. Instead, it's an acknowledgement that this is the spirit they are going for with the campaign, a summer blockbuster that you can play. With the freedom of purely fictional conflict, they can do whatever they want without worry of offending. Not that it wouldn't adapt actual conflicts, but the worry of backlash was softened significantly since the majority of the presentation would be pure fiction. One of the first instances of plucking an actual conflict for the sensational campaign is the Brazil Favelas, which serve as your playground for 2 missions. The first is a chase mission to help prove the United States' innocence in the No Russian massacre. The second is your attempted exit from the country after command abandons you either due to interference from the ACS module that serves as a pretext to the Russian invasion, or due to Shepard wanting to cut off loose ends now that he has his war. Whatever the reason, this is used as an introduction to a returning character from the first Modern Warfare, Nikolai. While he was once an informant, now he has become a pilot of several expensive vehicles. How he came into possession of a Pavlo, Little Bird, and C-130 Hercules is never addressed. Just as the game's campaign went from somewhat grounded to action movie, Nikolai made the transition from a codename informant on ultranationalist activity to the man you would go to whenever you needed to be taxied somewhere. Brazil's favelas in the cultural subconscious were, and still are, synonymous with violence, mainly between the police and traffickers who live within them. This makes them a virtual, perfect tourist attraction for a war game. The verticality of the favelas, built on rolling hills and with structures haphazardly stuck on top of each other, makes for a prime video game environment with its narrow alleyways and rooftops. The ethos for many locations within the franchise follow the simple thought. This is a location known for its conflict and will help make the landscapes of the game more varied. Pay no mind to the history of the location and the reasons behind the conflict. Just throw in your Task Force 141 group, shoot the unnamed militia who are in your way, torture your victim, and then leave. The dialogue from these missions include references to their opposition to the police, and 2 strange references to cutting off the player's tongue. Looking into whether this was some sort of recurring feature of favela violence brought up no evidence. My only conjecture is that Infinity Ward thought it was an interesting threat to have the enemies make, though they say it in Portuguese and I only found it out by checking the militia's article on the Call of Duty fandom wiki. This representation of the Rio de Janeiro favela is about as close and as real as a very large majority of players are going to get to the reality of them. As a 3D space, the player controls their movement and view within. Modern Warfare 2 will leave a much larger impression of what that place is like to be than simply looking at Google image search results or watching YouTube videos of those who have actually gone to the city. Much like I mentioned earlier, thinking about the Middle East can easily summon memories of the brown deserts of Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, Battlefield, and Spec Ops: The Line. This is why I refer to the locations they pick as virtual tourist attractions, as it's an easy way and effective way to let the player exist within a space they would never otherwise be. It is also another example of how the series' authenticity is only ever surface level. While the impression of the overall picture presented may read as genuine, it only extends to the polygons that make up the zoomed out image. The history behind how these locations came to be, the actual density of detail and people within them are cast aside in the name of entertainment. Video games allow you to exist in worlds of fantasy, history, and concurrent altered reality, but very rarely do they utilize this advantage over text, images, and video. The most prominent example recently was Assassin's Creed Origins Discovery Tour, which allows you to walk through the game's version of ancient Egypt without quests to fulfill and people to kill, but instead marked pathways to follow in order to be led on the game's version of a museum tour. Now, this isn't to say that I expect Call of Duty to include an educational mode to inform the player about the locations they visit, but I point this out to show how the locations it has on display are not close to the actual reality of them. These images have no substance. The museum level unlocked after completing the campaign is more a highlight reel of what you have just played made interactive. They are miniaturized caricatures of where have you been, what you have done, and who you have killed. It is a playground for you to run around in, complete with an elementary school level joke about not pressing the big red button, which will activate the exhibits and program them to attack you. While in Brazil, your group does not work with any local authority. Instead, you follow some NPCs who confront Rojas' assistant. He opens fire on them and then your driver, whose blood covers the vehicle you're in with a substance that resembles strawberry jam more than blood, as was mocked online for a similar splatter that appears when you take significant damage. This is one of 3 instances of civilians being present during gameplay, as they will run away from the chaos as you chase down the assistant. Unlike No Russian, you will be forced to a checkpoint restart if you shoot a civilian, so that mission was the exception to the rule due to a variety of reasons. Eventually, you shoot the assistant in the leg and leave him with Soap and Ghost, who have a car battery wired up to torture him for information on your actual target, Alejandro Rojas. Roach, this is going to take some time. Go with Meat and Royce and check out the favela for any sign of Rojas. That's where this guy was headed. Within the fiction of the game, the CIA is essentially a sister organization of Task Force 141, as Joseph Allen is inducted into the CIA as a deep cover operative after being recruited for Task Force 141 by General Shepard after the second mission. I mentioned this due to torture underneath the CIA being well documented, most notably in the Committee Study of the Central Intelligence Agency's Detention and Interrogation Program, released in late 2014 that confirmed what had been greatly accepted for quite some time, that the interrogation techniques of the CIA were ineffective and immoral, but continued nonetheless. In Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, Price beats and executes Assad once it is established that Zakayev was his supplier. Lighter fare for what would come later. Here in Modern Warfare 2, torture is alluded to, but shies away from showing it outright. Future titles in the franchise would not be so coy. Treyarch with Black Ops would feature a character having glass placed in his mouth and punched, and most games in the series would feature you being captured and forced to endure some form of punishment before being let free to once again engage in left trigger, right trigger gameplay. In the reboot of Modern Warfare, they have the player character undergo waterboarding, a method of torture that the US has long employed, though in this game it is done by the Russian enemy. In Modern Warfare 2, torture seems to be something gestured at as part of the action movie plotline. An image of sparks flying lets your mind think about the feeling of electricity coursing through the body before you move onward. Once Rojas is captured, the next mission opens with you leaving him for dead, crucified against a bloodied wall next to a table with a car battery, drill, pliers, and a screwdriver. You can put a bullet in his head as a mercy killing with no recourse or comment. Torture in this game seems to be an accepted fact, much like how in the previous game the invasion of a foreign country was just something you accepted without question. Roach, as the silent protagonist, has no reaction to the methods of Task Force 141, and the game is complicit in that silence. Leaving bodies behind is a feature of the series, with the after effects of your firefights non-existent. Your team enters Brazil as the classic international team of badasses whose authority supersedes the sovereignty of whatever nation may be harboring the people you need. The favelas are a place where people live, after all, even if the game displays them as nothing but empty husks full of militia. Who comes and cleans up all the bodies you leave behind after flying away on helicopter? It calls up memories of Death from Above, a level from the previous game, which makes an appearance here as a Spec Ops mission. In that level, you rain terror from on high, and although destruction only occurs for certain scripted houses, the barrage of firepower certainly destroyed many buildings, homes of civilians whose only crime was to have lived in a place the SAS considered expendable. Prior to that level, you take out a group of ultranationalists harassing and about to kill an old man. You save him by killing the ultranationalists, but what of the bodies you leave behind? Does that old man and his family now have to dispose of them for fear of just being rounded up and executed later for aiding the enemy? What sort of recourse is there for foreign government blasting through your town and destroying people's homes? An obviously technical explanation for the lack of actual physical destruction is that collateral damage would require too much work, and an engine like Battlefield Bad Company 2. The implied reason is that special forces don't have to work with foreign governments or deal with the aftermath of their destruction. One of the most intriguing elements of Modern Warfare 2 is the character of General Shepard. Voiced by Lance Henriksen, it is Shepard's monologues that introduce you to the campaign and a speech exuding the value and importance of the US military. Shepard's specific line about training to fight alongside and praying they don't later hate you, combined with the first couple missions taking place in Afghanistan, is very hard to not read as a commentary on Operation Cyclone. In the late 70s to early 90s, the CIA armed the Afghan Mujahideen to help overthrow the Socialist Government Party who held power in the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan until 1992. Since then, the country has seen no end to violence, due in part to continued foreign funding, bombing, and interventions, part of which led to al-Qaeda underneath Osama bin Laden and others to enact the September 11, 2001 attacks, and an increased presence of the US military in the country following the retaliatory October 7, 2001 invasion. Whereas Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare follows a US invasion of an unnamed Middle Eastern country following a violent coup and a hunt for nuclear weapons, not unlike the lie about weapons of mass destruction preceding the 2003 invasion of Iraq, Modern Warfare 2 presents US military presence in Afghanistan as fighting an unnamed militia group alongside the training of local soldiers in the Afghan National Army. Shepard's comments are, here, in the game, directed towards the Russians you fought alongside in Call of Duty 4, against the ultranationalist party during a civil war, who now appear to have come together underneath a government sympathetic to the cause of Imran Zakayev. but also can be very easily to be construed to be against the ANA you are now aiding within Afghanistan, as one day in the future they too might turn against the United States, who are doing a majority of the fighting in this first real mission. As its opening, you can view one ANA soldier as he sits on his cell phone behind the burned husk of a car as Americans engage combatants across the river. The biggest question in regards to Shepard is, does he represent the evils of the US military, or is he simply a bad apple, a rotten portion of an otherwise largely pure and benevolent seeking system? Shepard's reveal as a villain comes via a betrayal, shooting both Ghost and the player character, complete with dramatic music, dialogue from Price saying not to trust Shepard, and a slowed down sequence of watching your bodies be burned and left behind. Shepard's motivation for his actions is outlined in the finale. Presumably, Shepard assembled or was put in charge of Task Force 141 in order to combat terrorists like Makarov, though Shepard allowed Makarov to commit the attack in No Russian and leave Task Force 141/CIA agent to die in order for Makarov to incite a war between Russia and the United States that would allow Shepard to extract revenge against the ultranationalist Russians behind the events of Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, and also drive up recruitment in response to a Russian invasion of the East Coast. With the war started, he began to either send Task Force 141 on suicide missions, the only easy day was yesterday, or attempt to leave them behind, the Hornet's Nest, until his appearance to kill you himself, Loose Ends, after you've extracted information from Makarov's safe house, presumably linking him to the events of No Russian. Obviously, the logic behind the false flag international airport mass shooting and subsequent secret invasion of the East Coast and Shepard believing a war causing untold American deaths will be beneficial ultimately for his military might is hard to believe in. Every time I replay the campaign, I find myself asking the same questions regarding how much did Makarov know, how much did Shepard know, how much was planned, what exactly are the logistics behind the events that are unfolding. It's the type of plot that begins to fall apart the moment you begin asking questions. Modern Warfare 2 sacrifices believable military fiction and, as aforementioned, sinks deeper into the development of imagery first and reasoning later. The strong imagery of a suburb being invaded by foreign soldiers isn't on display for the first time in Modern Warfare 2, and the mission Wolverines is a clear acknowledgement of Red Dawn, a 1984 film depicting the efforts of high schoolers to resist and fight back against the occupying forces of the Soviet Union in Colorado. The lack of details is beneficial for most World War III fiction, focusing on the events of the now instead of the lead-in. Video games, however, have an endemic problem with having to have the player character either be witness to or participant in every major event going on in the plot. This is why a nuclear bomb going off above the East Coast cannot just be viewed as a flash of white light from the ground war you are already participating in, but also from the viewpoint of an ISS astronaut above the atmosphere. It is why, no matter what shoes you are put into, you are a killing machine, downing well over 100 combatants in each mission you partake in, and are sent to do every important action ahead of every other ally alongside you. This participating in every step leading up to the Russian invasion of the eastern seaboard of the US opens up the plot and its details to more scrutiny than if it was just a complete surprise and not a retroactive revelation. General Shepard is less of an actualized being and more of a puppet strung up by Infinity Ward. Repeatedly, both Shepard and Price will mention how history is written by the victor. To Shepard, this is interpreted as the ends justify the means. The why behind World War III won't matter because he will lead the United States to victory. To Price, it is the reason to kill Shepard before he achieves this victory and wipes Price and Soap from the record. This focus on revenge can be seen from the very beginning via the familiar quotations that appear when you die during the campaign. As before, there are various military personnel and philosophical and political figure quotes, but this time there is a noticeable focus on the topic of revenge and blind nationalism. At first, it appears to be about Makarov and No Russian, though it retroactively becomes about General Shepard after the reveal. A lot of details in Modern Warfare 2 are servants to this twist in order to be reevaluated post-Loose Ends. Shepard's reputation for danger close becomes something you raise an eyebrow to when you realize why he regards his soldiers as expendable. Readings of Shepard as a representative of the evils of the military-industrial complex are very generous at best and a bit diluted at worst. Shepard is nothing but a means to an end, a shock twist to introduce in our Michael Bay action game to kill the player character yet again. Asking a Call of Duty game to be critical or antagonistic to the role America plays in foreign policy is like asking God to part the clouds and speak to you directly. Shepard's evil is not subversive or undermining the military at large. He is actually just an adaptation of General Hummel from The Rock, a film the game already pulls various imagery from, so why not a character? Both Hummel and Shepard feel like they were wronged by the US government, and both enact plans that threaten the lives of American citizens in order to achieve their vision of justice. Unlike Hummel, Shepard ultimately follows through on his threats, plunging the United States into World War III against Russia with the hopes of stirring up patriotism and enlistment. He has a deranged vision, but as Infinity Ward wrote it, it only speaks on behalf of Shepard in the game, and certainly not for the rest of the US military. Infinity Ward went through the death and resurrection between the release of Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3, which does not help to shine light on their intentions behind their choices in Shepard's villainy. Vince Zampella and Jason West were fired, and employee resignations followed their termination that left Infinity Ward as a brand name only, filled in by new hires and help from Sledgehammer Games, whose reward was to work on their own Call of Duty titles until their death. Due to this, Modern Warfare 3's additions to the fiction have little insights as to the intentions behind Modern Warfare 2's plot choices or plans for following up on them. Ultimately, Makarov and Shepard lack thematic depth. Makarov is a monster in the shadows, a character who is spoken of and chased after, but only ever glimpsed at during the infamous No Russian level, which is actually an optional mission. He is the result of a post-Dark Knight world, where Joker characters became more and more prominent. Characters of great power and influence who always eluded capture and just wanted to watch the world burn. Shepard is more present, both in physical form and through voiceover, but is merely a means to an end. His death also serves one purpose, a lead-in to a sequel that is very likely not the intended product of Infinity Ward circa 2009. Modern Warfare 2 sacrifices cogency for imagery, and it does a fine job of making that imagery striking. Wolverines opens with Russian paratroopers descending from C-130s in the background as you progress out of sight of an enemy ATV through the backyards and living rooms of the stereotypical suburb. In the reveal trailer for Modern Warfare 2, Infinity Ward chose to hide this and future American soil levels from view, picking only the Task Force 141 footage of Brazil, the Caucasus mountain range, and eastern Russia to show off the campaign. The footage ends with the thermal view of what we now know to be the defensive Burger Town. But at the time, it appeared to harken back to the AC-130 level of its predecessor, though now with your camera view tracking ordnance as it rocketed towards the ground to kill the white highlights of combatants. While the steps to get to this point are questionable, what it does deliver, it does well if you're willing to swallow the logical fallacies and let the images wash over you. Frequently in first-person shooters, the special operations are the least interesting, as they are more about attempting to deliver set pieces than place you in a believable experience. The Army Ranger missions in Modern Warfare 2 still deliver on set pieces, but also present you as a cog in a larger machine, a machine currently attempting to fight off an invasion on the whole eastern seaboard. Whether or not it was intentional, I think the Defend Burger Town objective is very clever commentary on what America has chosen to be its symbols to other cultures abroad. While you fight through neighborhoods of standard white picket fence two-story houses, you end up spending a good amount of time defending a commercial district within a gas station, diner, and stand-ins for Burger King, Taco Bell, and whatever local sports bar chain you might frequent. These are the images we have collectively chosen to give the power of representation to. It borders on satire, but the lack of a comedic bite or cartoon analogs of, say, your Grand Theft Auto make it seem much more like a restrained commentary on something Infinity Ward believes in, consciously or unconsciously. American troops making their brave stand atop of national icon Buffalo Wild Wings. This level offers a large sandbox to maniacally run about in from the one point of interest to the next. The frantic pace and Keith David shouting in your ear the entire time is a stark contrast to the non-licensed analogs for familiar fast food chains. It's treated seriously in fiction, and better for it. The next mission to take place in America is Exodus. While you begin in suburbia once again, its climax is within a neighborhood called Arcadia, an elaborately gated community with houses that can only be comfortably owned by the wealthy. It even sits next to a golf course, a well-known sign of high property value. Exodus ends in a scene ripped from another invasion movie, the Steven Spielberg War of the Worlds, and its plane crash set that lives on as a memorial in the Universal Studios backlot. This set is even foreshadowed when entering Arcadia, as a C-130 can be seen on fire and descending into the background. Where Spielberg's commercial airliner crashing into the suburb Tom Cruise's family sought refuge in is part of the film's larger allegory for 9/11, Modern Warfare 2's borrowing of that imagery is not really in service to anything than providing a cool set for the player to see and walk through on their way to the next checkpoint. That tendency of images with no substance changes when you next pick up on Private Ramirez. The usual briefing is replaced with the emergency broadcast service tones, and you pick up his perspective in an unknown location underground. As you exit the makeshift bunker, you come into trenches and into view of a moderately destroyed Washington monument. Next to suburbia, Washington, D.C. is probably the most enduring landscape to represent the United States, and makes for a great backdrop for a foreign invasion. It is among the nation's capital that the rest of the Army Ranger campaign missions take place, from within the Department of Commerce, through downtown, and the best mission of the game taking place after the EMP, and ultimately to the most important building in the country, the White House. The finale has you fighting your way into the White House, callsign Whiskey Hotel, ascending to the top level in order to light flares and stop an impending airstrike a la The Rock yet again. Fallout 3 tapped into the strength of the aftermath of a destroyed capital landscape, but Modern Warfare 2 lets you fight through that destruction as it happens. The heights of these levels would be attempted in the sequel as it opens in Manhattan, the only other contender for a location that represents the United States at large, and then makes its way to Europe for a counter-invasion that can never quite hit the same highs as fighting amongst the burning ruins of Washington, D.C. Once the jets pass by without delivering their payloads, a ranger asks when we'll be in Moscow, and your ally Corporal Dunn remarks, "Not soon enough, man, but I know we're gonna burn it down when we get there." This sentiment fulfills Shepard's desire of stirring up a hatred he already had for the Russian ultranationalists. It also plays into the quotes on revenge that have often popped up when dying throughout the campaign, especially the popular refrain, "An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind." Despite these cautionary interjections, the Russian invasion plays into our fear of foreign invasion that is both a nightmare and a fantasy at the same time. Our national pride cries out against these events from occurring, but at the same time we long for a chance to prove our might. Shepard's desire to stir within us the inner patriot is mirrored by the adventures of Sergeant Foley and Private Ramirez. Our culture produces these pieces of entertainment because we're chomping at the bit to get out there and fight the good fight, to no longer perform airstrikes on enemies hiding among the crowds, but to draw lines in the sand and storm beaches, as an updated Normandy invasion via VIII in Modern Warfare 3 exemplifies. This is one of the enduring cultural feelings embodied by the campaign, enshrining the men of our military in glory among the fire and rubble of our capital. Look at these men and the sacrifices and glory they have attained. Doesn't a part of you wish you could participate? No Russian is a difficult level to talk about, less so for its content and more so for its intent and ultimate effect. Its purpose appears to be twofold: to establish the evil of Makarov and to provide an excuse for why Russia would invade the United States. Earlier in the game, the retrieval of an ACS module jumps the logistical hurdle, and the massacre within this level provides the leap for the motivational hurdle. Activision and Infinity Ward were so scared about the blowback to this level that they included a several-part acceptance sequence the player has to button through in order to even play it when you start a new game in a fresh install. The content itself wavers between a bloodless, edgy, fail-to-provoke, and an actually chilling act to play out willfully. Playing the level and refusing to participate reveals it as a sham. You walk at a deliberately slowed pace compared to the entire rest of the game in an attempt to really lean onto the player the important meaning of this event. However, if they truly wanted to evoke an emotion of disgust, then commit to the bit and force us to kill civilians. Participate in the act, and it's revealed to be somewhat affecting in how frictionless it is. There is no pushback, no difficulty or opposition. You aim with the left trigger and fire with the right as you do in every other level. Even the soft auto-targeting is gone, and you're given free aim to gun down civilians en masse. Makarov's villainy is cemented within this mission, but the participation of the player, whether active or as an observer, makes them complicit in it as well, only to be absolved through death at the end. A lack of commitment to the horrible imagery of taking innocent lives is the most damning thing about this mission. Mass shootings have only become more common since Modern Warfare 2's release, with the worst happening in my hometown of Las Vegas in October of 2017. This mass shooting has no discernible ideological backing, no real target. People died for nothing. No Russian shock factor has only degraded over time as we have been subjected again and again to the horror of innocent lives taken by gunmen. Visual flares within the mission itself undermine its serious tone, as terminal arrival and departure times are intricately flipped over to delayed as you move past them. The mission even devolves into a familiar shooting gallery as you move from gunning down bystanders to gunning down police. I hit upon this point again and again, but it's shocking imagery that exists as a one-time gag, something to stir up headlines before release and be quickly forgotten about and even memed on afterwards. No Russian's legacy is of being one, that one time Call of Duty had you partake in a mass shooting, and two, as a line of dialogue still quoted over a decade later as in-joke for anyone who understands its meaning. Interrogating pieces of the Call of Duty franchise can be frequently frustrating and rewarding at the same time, as the intent behind the text can be so shallow, but the unintended effects of it can be so rich. No Russian has the appearance of a rich text of a mission to really sink into all of its various tendrils of influence and effect, but ultimately it's forgettable shock that attempts to try to push the envelope without nary a thought as to what it's pushing and why. Art can and should be shocking and confrontational at times, but attempting to place a meekly confrontational mass shooting within the midst of your bro shooter of 6 snowmobile jumps and logic-defying EMP blasts is a bit insulting. Something I have come back to again and again throughout this essay is how Modern Warfare 2 very often presents very strong imagery with little thought beyond presenting a spectacle. This is not always a bad thing. Sometimes paintings, probably regarded as the most art of art, can just be pleasing to look at. And while various images presented throughout Modern Warfare 2 are well produced, flashy, and can even stir emotions, their intended effects easily falls behind their implicit meanings. Task Force 141 as world police leaving bodies and consequences behind for others to deal with, the US Army's superiority to the local ANA, with their lone soldier chilling behind the skeleton of a car as the Rangers do all the work, a desire to be authentic, but only in marketable ways, continuing to adapt the imagery of popular films without adapting their context and thematic purpose, providing a virtual tour of locations you'll never visit yourself, but without the history or richness of those same locales and the culture that produced them. The fear and desire of an invasion of our suburban neighborhoods by a foreign power, the pride of fighting back amongst the ruins of our nation's strongest cultural icons, fast food chains, and the White House. These images do, in fact, have substance to them, though their intended function is more often than not far from their reality.